Hello and welcome to week 4 of PA117. This week we are actually in chapter 4 of your Law and Ethics book. And you should have this updated version, so make sure that you do check to make sure that that is your updated version. Okay, and it starts on page 63. And this one is a lot of memorization, and you think some of these laws don't really even make sense, or you shouldn't even have to read about them, but the certification exam has some of these on there that you just have to commit to memory and know why we have them because of the history of them, what makes it true for them today. So I want to make sure that I hit some of those. So going into page 64, the first one I see here that you do need to commit to memory is Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. This prohibited the interstate distribution or sale of alterated and misbranded food and drugs. So this is when they said people can't just say on cosmetics, this will heal wrinkles if it really doesn't, or this will heal things that heal things. That was banned. So people had to put a label on them that was misbranding, fraudulent claims. So that is the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. That one comes up on the certification exam, so make sure that you know. Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 was implemented to regulate the tax distribution, importation, and production of opiates. And this is a thing as well, so they'll ask you about that. Anything to do with opiates. So throughout the 1800s, opiates and cocaine were most unregulated. Many people were addicted to these substances, and as many 1 in 400 U.S. citizens were addicted to opium itself. As time went on, an increasing number of crimes were linked to the use of opiates and cocaine, and so the public opinion began to sway toward prohibition or ban of alcohol and drugs. And so now, basically, we have a law that says is a controlled substance. It numbers those controlled substances, and so we're going to get into that. So make sure that you know the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. Another one, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, one that comes up on the certification exam. And you think you don't have to remember the dates? You do. One of the questions on there is like, which year was this? So make sure that you do commit that to memory. And the best way to do that is probably through note cards. So if you are a person that needs to memorize by note cards, that's how I would do it. And I would do it now so that later when you're going to go study for the exam, like which is maybe 5 months from here now, when you're at the very end of your program and you say, oh, what was that Ms. K said I needed to study? Oh, yes, the Food and Drug Act and all of that. So make sure that you're doing it now so that you can put it in place to study it for your certification exam at the end of this program. Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, also another one. Pharmaceutical manufacturers were required to file new drug applications with the FDA. And so everything had to go through the FDA. They need to be approved. They had to be tested, things like that. So the FDA approves the investigational use of drugs on humans and ensures that approved drugs are safe and effective, so that not just drugs are hitting the market and being used, but they have gone through trials and they are safe and that kind of stuff. So that one is good to know about. And it goes into talking about kind of legislation on that. On page 71, here's one, Poison Prevention Packaging Act of 1970. This authorized the Consumer Product Safety Commission to create standards for child-resistant packaging. Its special packaging terminology signifies containers made to be very difficult for young children to open. This act requires that a few OTC drugs and nearly all legend drugs are anything that is prescription legend drugs, be packaged in child-resistant containers that can be opened by 80% of children younger than 5, but can be opened by 90% of adults. And you will see in a pharmacy some older individuals really can't open them either, and so they'll ask for non-child resistant caps. That then makes sure that you put a warning label on that that says this is a legend drug that does not have a safety cap on it, and so to keep it out of reach of children. So you'll just put that warning label right there on the side. So that one is good to know, and I'm pretty sure you probably know why that came into effect, probably because a lot of children were dying of overdoses, getting into containers that did not have child-resistant caps on them, which that could be awful. And you might read more about that. This is a really very interesting chapter, Chapter 4. I really love that we're here now. OSHA of 1970, or the Occupational Safety and Health Act. You want to know what OSHA stands for? That's also a question on the certification exam. In 1970, Congress passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act to prevent workplace disease and injuries. The statute applies to virtually every U.S. employer, and the general purpose of the act is to require all employers to ensure employee safety and health. And this is something that you can actually put on your resume, that you are OSHA certified after you come out of this program, because I wouldn't say certified, excuse me, OSHA knowledgeable, because you know that when you go into a pharmacy that you have to follow safety procedures such as washing your hands before touching the drugs, that if a drug falls on the floor, you know what to do with it, that kind of stuff. So you will read over that and then some of the key points of that. Drug recalls, that one's a good one to read over, page 77, what the FDA might do in a drug recall, and why every drug has a NDC number or a control number, so that it can then be taken back on a recall if we have to do that. Orphan Drug Act of 1983, this one is a popular one, offers federal financial incentives to commercial and nonprofit organizations to develop and market drugs previously unavailable in the United States. It says before a new drug can be marketed, substantial evidence of its safety and effectiveness must be proven. So make sure that you know that, what an orphan drug is and why they've made an act on it, some of the key points of the legislation of that. Prescription Drug Marketing Act of 1987 is a good one to know, was enacted to ensure that prescription drug products are safe and effective and to prevent tainting, counterfeiting, and misbranding of drugs. Again, going against that fraudulent level. You can't just say that a drug heals if it doesn't do it, so that kind of stuff. Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1990, or OBRA, O-B-R-A, 90, contained an important amendment affecting Medicare and Medicaid. Make sure that you know about that one. These are all really good to know. American with Disability Act of 1990, again, a big one that stands out in my head. This one I like to point out, page 85, Dietary Supplemental Health and Education Act of 1994. It says that this act was intended to amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Its purpose was to change the way in which dietary supplements are labeled and regulated. Excuse me. Got a dry throat. It is important to remember that dietary supplements have always been and still are treated as foods and not drugs. So that's why a supplement on the side has every listed ingredient. It's more of a food than is a drug. And they're not regulated by the FDA. To act affects pharmacy technicians with respect to the displaying, stocking, and recommendation of supplements. In the pharmacy, technicians are not allowed to recommend dietary supplements, just as they are not allowed to recommend OTC or legend drugs. So, for example, if a patient comes up to you and asks you, what should I use for my cold? Refer them to the pharmacist. And if the pharmacist says, hey, can you go show them where the Tylenol cold and flu is? Sure, of course, I can take them to there. Or if they ask about a supplement, sure, I can take you to that. You can always show them where it is in your pharmacy, but you cannot recommend a drug. So make sure that you know that. Always let the pharmacist ask that question. Again, that is under their law, under their malpractice. If they recommend something that the patient is allergic to, we don't know their health history. That is up to the pharmacist to know. All right, HIPAA. Big one, 86. HIPAA. Make sure you know how to spell HIPAA, what it stands for, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. I was actually in the pharmacy when this started, so this was pretty interesting, and where it is today and what people have to sign now. Make sure you read over that. That one is a big one to memorize. Okay, I think those are the ones that I wanted to point out to you. Make sure you do know what the FDA stands for, what the EPA stands for, what the DEA stands for, or the Drug Enforcement Agency. Those are good ones to know as well. If you have any questions, please let me know. We have the review questions in the back then that you are responsible for. This chapter is all about memorization and knowing why the law was put into place for what and what the legislations are and the key legislation. So make sure that you write that down on your note card so that you can memorize all of that. Again, if you have any questions, let me know, and have a great week.